Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. So as you can see by the thumbnail of this video, I am coming off a hot weekend, having two top fours, one in a local tournament and one in this tournament we're going to talk about here today. We're going to talk about Ka0s Treasure Series 3. We're going to break down the top 16 deck lists from this tournament and go from there. Now, the Treasure Series is a series put on by the Ka0s tournaments, which is closer to like a Mox Masters series. The Ka0s series of tournaments has been, based out of the old Nexus tournaments. Ka0s has run them, and they have been basically free-to-play tournaments. And then the Treasure Series came about, which is, as I mentioned, a little bit closer to a Mox Masters style event where they are paid entry, a little bit higher prize pool, stuff like that. And they're, just classic competitive EDH tournaments, and they're all on Discord. So if you're interested in participating in those, feel free to check down the description down below to find out a little bit more about them. Without any further ado, I'd like to remind you to hit like and subscribe if you like videos like this, or check out patreon.com/comedianmtg. But let's jump right into those deck lists. I gotta say, we're already starting out. We have some spicy decks in today's tournament, and I'm really excited to talk about them. There's a lot of decks in here that I think people would not initially expect to be making top 16s right away. Meanwhile, first off, jumping right off the bat, we have 16th place here, a Dina Soul Sisters list by Love. This is a combo list using Dina as a really cheap, efficient sacrifice outlet in the command zone. It sacrifices your Protean Hulks, so it's already that in the command zone. Plus, it also works with the ever classic Exquisite Blood. So for those who don't know, because of Dina's ability, whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life, and Exquisite Blood combos with your commander. So there's just already 1 card combo with your commander in the command zone, on top of it being a sacrifice outlet for Protean Hulk style strategies. It seems like the main pile here in this list is the Blood Artist, Lesser Masticore, and I believe it should be, the Disciple of the Vault pile. So that seems to be the main combo pile in this list. There's also, it seems, some Gravecrawler shenanigans in the deck, and playing some interesting stuff like Spectrum Sentinel, which I'm not really sure why this one is in the deck. So basically, anytime your opponent plays a non-basic, you gain a life, which then hurts your opponents each for 1 life. But, it's interesting to see, I guess, a quasi-stacks piece, interestingly. And, like, fetch lands dome your opponents for 2 if you have your commander on the battlefield. But not a piece I was expecting to see in this list. I'm wondering if there's any extra utility here that I'm missing for this. Maybe there's a combo line or something like that. List is also playing Witherbloom Apprentice and the ever so classic James Mogg as your discount Thassa's Oracle pile in Golgari. And yeah, so there's like a lot of combo pieces here. You're playing Adnaz in your Protean Hulk deck, but as I mentioned, like the curve's pretty low in this list. If you look down here, I'm pretty sure it's only 1.32 with the fact that you're playing a 7-drop in your Protean Hulk and a number of other like reasonably expensive pieces. Now, historically speaking, Protean Hulk has not really worked well with Ad Nauseam, but specifically because you have the ability to have things like your Witherbloom combos, which actually don't require that you have your Protean Hulk pile in your deck, and you have your, once again, 1-card combos with your commander. It makes sense that this list would have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to having Ad Nauseam in a Protean Hulk style strategy. But yeah, Dina's not a list I expect to see do well very often, and it's one of those lists that was talked about a lot when Strixhaven first came out. So it's cool to see the list actually putting up a result here and making top 16 performance of this tournament. Definitely a lot of really interesting cards in this list, and I heavily suggest anyone interested definitely check this list out. And it's got some cool stuff in it. We have the brand new Narset Enlightened Exile. This is the newest Narset from the March of the Machines, The Aftermath, and this is not the only commander from March of the Machine, The Aftermath that actually makes an appearance here in this tournament. We actually have 3 of the top 16 being March of the Machine commanders, so this is pretty cool. This is the one I thought was the most unique. I'm a big sucker for Narset in any form that Narset comes in. I think I've liked every single Narset card, and this one's pretty unique. So Tom, kind of classically known for being a Nexus player in general, and also being a Nexus player who loves to brew, famously like the only result on 5-color Joda that I've ever heard of in a cEDH tournament, and used to be like a Riel channeler way back during the Flash Hulk days. So like definitely known for playing some spicier decks, experimenting with new brews. Always respect a good brewer in the format. So Narset is a 3/4 for 1 in Jeska. It says creatures you control have prowess, and whenever it attacks, exile target non-creature non-land card with mana value less than its power from a graveyard. Copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So the idea is to sort of just mill your library, do the classic like Underworld Breach style stuff, right? You get your intuition Underworld Breach lines, you get to, you know, play your brain freezes, all that stuff in Jeskai, and then you get to sort of just dump a bunch of interaction in your graveyard, and you get to use cute stuff like Wind's Rebuke to mill yourself and your opponents. You get to brain freeze yourself. I know when people were talking about this commander initially, they were talking about using Traumatize with it to like mill your whole library, or mill half your library, and then like hope you hit your Underworld Breach. But it doesn't seem like this list is going for that avenue. But apart from that, it just seems like a lot of classic Jeskai mid-range pieces. You know, a lot of cards, as I mentioned, that have the extra ability to like draw and discard, throw things in the graveyard, and then trying to mostly do Underworld Breach style win conditions. I don't really see another way to actually win the game. Now that I'm looking through the list here, I don't see any other real win conditions. So I guess this is one of those decks where you just hope your breach isn't exiled, or else then you're going to try and kill people with Narset win condition. Seems like the way. Oh, I'm sorry. There's also Dualcaster Twin Flame. Sorry, misspoke there. Yeah, Dualcaster Twin Flame, classic option when you're a little low on colors here. But definitely a list with limited means to win the game. It's cool stuff. I like to see new commanders being played. I love a good Jeskai commander, and I hope that, you know, Narset can stick around, because it's, as I mentioned, I'm a sucker for Narsets. So every time they print a cool Narset card, I'm always intrigued. But definitely interesting, and congrats to Tom for bringing a completely new brew to the top 16 of this tournament. We have nixilis Captive Kingpin, Demon Slaying, art first form by Black Coffee. This was the player I actually played in the top 16, and this was a very interesting run by this deck. It was really cool. It actually seemed like it was running away with our game in the top 16, and a little bit of spoilers, I actually ended up winning that game with a well-timed dockside combo. But let's talk about nixilis. So nixilis itself, this is one of 2 nixilis Captive Kingpins that made the top 16. The first week it was legally available to be played, 2 top 16s with this deck, which is so cool. And the wild part is I'm seeing that there's like a common way that these decks are being played that isn't even the only way you can play this deck. Like I've seen, the list that I saw doing well this weekend are more like the aggro, and by aggro I mean like aggressively slanted, proactive, more, you know, explosive versions of the list. But I've also seen like stacks versions of this deck as well. So it's a flying 4/3 for 4 mana, 2 in black red. It has flying and trample too, which is like, when you start to think about this card and the way that it pops off, the fact that it's a flying trampler really adds up. It says whenever one or more opponents lose exactly 1 life, put 1/1/1 counter on nixilis. Then you exile the top card of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play that card. Oh, sorry, until your next end step. That's actually a bit of a difference there. Sorry. But yeah, so it's a 4/3 flying trampler. So already a decent body that, you know, starts to put up command zone damage, right? Like starts to really put up commander damage real quick, and gets you some card advantage in Rakdos. It does like kind of everything that you want a low color commander to do, which is like provide you a win condition, provides you card advantage, and this deck gets out of hand so fast. It's like little things that people don't think about. For example, every fetch land is a cantrip for your opponent. Every time you tap your City of Brass, like little things like that, your Waterlogged Grove, your Pain Lands, any of those things trigger nixilis. Anytime your opponents attack you with just an Esper Sentinel to try and give you a Timna draw, that's a draw from nixilis. You know, and I was lucky enough to be playing in a very smart pod against Coffee in the rounds of Swiss this tournament, because, you know, a lot of us were like, okay, going to combat, everyone needs to think, how many cards can we afford to give them right now? How many times can we crack a fetch? How many times can we do any of these game actions to be able to, you know, basically get around this deck? And this is actually, pretty sure I played both copies of this commander in the top 16. One of them I played in the top 16 itself, and the other one I played during the Swiss. But yeah, the commander puts on a huge threat. It like really, I feel like it's very easy to underestimate this commander, but I genuinely think, as far as commanders that are actually just Rakdos colored, I think it might be the best Rakdos commander ever printed. And I think it gives decks like Rog Tevesh, which are considered, some of the best Rakdos decks, even, partner decks in that combination. I think it gives that deck a run for its money as well. So really, really nothing but great stuff to say about Ob Nixilis. I think this is a really cool commander. Let's talk about some of the pieces in here. So we have cards like Disciple of Volt. Whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard, you can have an opponent lose exactly 1 life. Boom. Hey, that triggers your Ob Nixilis. You have Krark Parasite, which I know when I was playing against Sick Robot from Into the North, that his version of that list, he actually demonic tutored for Krark Parasite at one point. It says whenever an opponent draws a card, if you control a red permanent, i.e. your commander, it deals 1 damage to them. This is a 1-drop that just sort of like gets out of hand. Anytime they're drawing a card, you're like, okay, cool, that's a card for me too. Which includes their draw step for turn. You have cards like Blood Artist, pinging your opponents for smaller things. You have Immolation Shaman, turning any activated abilities apart from mana abilities into cantrips for yourself. Sardian Avenger, whenever an artifact from the graveyard, once again, artifact graveyard. We're noticing a little bit of theme here. Reckless Fireweeder, artifact comes in, pings for damage. Definitely a theme here. And, Mayhem Devil, whenever someone sacrifices something, ping, damage card, right? So you can see there's a pretty common theme of cards that want to do this stuff. Grape Shot, cracked in this deck. Like, Grape Shot turns into 2 mana, storm, draw a card, and put a 1/1 counter on your commander for every spell that was cast this turn, and also dealing damage to stuff and wiping the board and stuff like that. So, Grape Shot's cracked in this list. And there's also some I know, like Dockside Cloudstone Curio loops. It is playing Underworld Breach as a win con, playing Mana Barbs. Whenever a player taps a land for mana, it deals 1 damage to that player. So you tap 4 mana for one of your spells, that's 4 draws and 4 1/1 counters for Ob Nixilis. And also, as if this commander wasn't getting out of hand enough, there's just a 1-card combo with All Will Be One. If you get a single trigger, you infinitely deal damage and draw your deck. Seems good to me. Very, very strong. We have cards like Roiling Vortex here, which is, once again, everyone's upkeep. I'm drawing another card, also stopping your opponents from gaining life, and, if they cast their 0 mana rocks, doming them for 5. If you notice, there's a lot of common themes here. But yeah, Cloudstone Curio Lines, definitely one way to secure the victory there. I know in our semifinals, we almost lost to Coffee by having Dockside and Imperial Recruiter, because Imperial Recruiter was able to come down, bounce itself with the Curio, because it got the Dockside, and there was a bunch of stuff that was happening, and like, had we given any more treasures, we would have lost the game. So it was very, very close in that matchup. And then also this deck is just aggressively slanted, so playing things like Culling, Dark Ritual, all of that stuff into an ad nauseum. Definitely some reanimate strategy stuff here, but not going too hard into that. Also on the Twin Flame dual caster mage combo to be able to win the game that way. Just some cool stuff. There's some, a lot of interesting play with the graveyard, a lot of, explosive. I'm going to do a damage to a thing. I'm going to sack my thing, bring it back, reanimate it, use a Meat Hook Massacre, like all of that stuff to then just turn Ob Nixilis into a beater. Like, so if your Underworld Breach stuff doesn't work, if your dual caster Twin Flame stuff doesn't work, it is ridiculously easy to get this commander to like 12, 13, 14, 15 power and then just murder people. We have another Ob Nixilis here. This is by Sumim, just called Ob Nixilis by Sumim. And this one is, in my opinion, a little slower. There's a little more grindy version of this deck. And also, unless I'm mistaken, no, this one is not playing the Broodlord combos. But I also saw a different version of this deck that was playing the Broodlord combos as well. So this wasn't the one I played during the Swiss, but there was a third person also playing Ob Nixilis combos, playing Hoarding Broodlord. But some different stuff you can see in this list. This one's going, I think, a little bit more mid-range, a little more slow, right? Hoping to sort of do the Ob Nixilis plan into the longer game. And what I can do here is I can use Moxfield's compare feature to talk about the cards that are different between these two lists. So with our newer one, the one we're just checking out, we have Hedron Detonator, which is literally just another one of these. When an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, 1 damage to an opponent. Boom, suddenly all of your artifacts are turning into cantrips and making your commander grow larger. Goldhound, 1 mana menace attacker, also happens to be able to sacrifice your mana. This one's playing more Magda synergies, which they're both on Cloudstone lines, so that's very interesting. It's also on Bolus's Citadel, so you can end up in scenarios where you're like, okay, Dockside makes 5, play Magda, tutor up my Bolus's Citadel, probably win the game. This one's also on Grim Hireling, as I mentioned, just more, reason for it to be a mid-rangey version. I like Firebrand Archer a lot in this deck. The fact that any non-creature spell is suddenly a cantrip for you. Now, it does say 1 or more opponents, so it's not like you draw 3 from every spell on Firebrand Archer, but I still think, any any non-creature spell drawing you a card is still really good. Rakdos Charm, I've been told by multiple people that they are convinced it does and does not work the way you want it to with Ob. From what I understand, the last thing I heard about this card was that Rakdos Charm does not give you multiple cards, it just gives you one. I would love for a judge to chime in about that one. Also, Kessig Flamebreaker, going back to the talk about Firebrand Archer, literally the same card, just with a little bit different stat line. What's really cool about Ob is that it also punishes your opponents playing certain cards. So for example, if your opponent casts an Ad Nauseam, every time that you flip a card off Ad Naus and it would ding someone for 1 damage, after the Ad Naus resolves, Ob gets all of those triggers. The same thing for Necropotent. So apparently during the Swiss, one player jammed a Necropotence and drew 20 cards with an Ob Nixilis on the battlefield, and they died too. 20 more power on an Ob Nixilis and drawing 20 cards, which is wild. I don't know why would anyone jam into that, but you know, whatever it is. And then obviously Prosper is definitely really interesting in this version of the deck, because now suddenly all those cards that you're playing from Ob Nixilis, you know, you're making mana every time you do one of those. The biggest, I think, downside of this Ob deck is that it loses really hard to Drannith Magistrate, right? That seems to be the card that like really hoses it, because not only does it lock out your commander, it can also lock you out from casting the cards from exile that you get off Ob. But the upside is, if you ping a bunch of people and you can't access your cards, you then have an Ob Nixilis that's probably like, I don't know, 15 power, and then you murder them, and then you can cast your cards. But yeah, Ob Nixilis seems really cool. It seems like, as I said, I think it's genuinely likely to be the best Rakdos commander ever for cEDH. I think it has so much potential, and I'm really excited to see more and more builds of this deck, because I think every single time I see this list, someone shows me a new innovation with it that, you know, you're not expecting, and I think there's a lot of really cute pieces that can do really well with this deck. And also you get the new Mount Doom coming up in the Lord of the Rings set, which also is a land that pings everybody for 1 if you tap mana into it, which is kind of funny that they're straight up just printing a Rakdos land that works well with this commander coming up pretty soon. But yeah, congrats to Sumi for that list. We have a Timna Malcolm by Lieutenant Dan, I believe is the shorthand of these number letter combos. We have an Esper Malcolm list here. Classic Esper Malcolm stuff. I believe we're going, classic Doomsday lines, doing the Grim Tutor to get the things you need, winning with either Mnemonic Betrayal, Doomsday, Thassa's Oracle, and Demonic Consultation lines seem to be the main way that I see this strategy winning. It is usually an Ad Nauseam deck and is a Grafdigger's Cage deck, which is really interesting. A lot of the time, every Timna Malcolm player I talk to usually says that, you know, you can play your Yawgmoth's Will to make it so that your Doomsday is more effective, and you can make it so that your Ad Nauseam is more effective in these colors, and just accept the fact that at times you will be hosed by your own Grafdigger's Cage, because the rest of the time it stops a lot of the other scary decks in the format from doing their thing, because Breach is more efficient than your Yawgmoth's Will, because creature abilities, you know, the Finale of Devastation and Battle for Ikoria, all those things, or Invasion of Ikoria, are much more efficient at getting stuff onto the battlefield. So basically what I usually hear is that the Grafdigger's Cage is worth it. And apart from that, it is just a lot of Esper good stuff, trying to use the fact that, you know, these are arguably 2 of the best commanders for partners. You know, getting your mana advantage on an invasive flyer here with Malcolm, and then getting your card advantage with Timna in the command zone, utilizing the fact that it's a very strong combination that generates you a good amount of value with all of your attacks, and turning that into a win by just playing a really fair, grindy Esper game. We have a Tivit here in the top 16. It is not the only Tivit to be talked about today. We've got our Tivit Hate Bearers by Booty Slayer, which is a great name here. This is a classic Tivit mid-range list. Tivit's just been one of the most consistent lists in the format, week after week. The other deck I had a top result with this weekend, the one I took to my local tournament and top forward with, was this Tivit list. Not this Tivit list specifically, but my Tivit mid-range list, which has a few more like chunky mid-range threats, but at the same time, it's the classic Tivit trying to win with your time sieve by your commander either entering the battlefield or hitting your opponents, making 5 artifacts, and taking infinite turns or a finite amount of turns to be able to kill all of your opponents. Other win conditions being the combination of Displacer Kitten and 3 mana Teferi with any 0 mana rock or mana rock that is able to net you mana by, you know, casting your mana rock, resetting your Teferi bouncing the mana rock back to your hand, etc. And that becomes a loop with those. And then, as we mentioned, the classic Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Consultation stuff. I know in my personal list, I'm actually running this exact same combo. We're doing Notion Thief and Windfall, so that's often just a win con in the deck. I'm down to just the one wheel here as well. well as this player is, so definitely interesting to see that. But yeah, it's Tivit's been doing really, really well lately. It's been putting up super consistent numbers. Players have been doing really, really well with it. It's one of those decks that having played it a good amount now, I think the sort of consensus is like Tivit's really awesome, really, really strong, and sometimes it feeds a dockside and you throw the game because you gave them 8 treasures because everyone keeps giving you clues. Or it turns the corner and provides a lot of mid-range value and gets you a lot of card advantage. Also, a lot of Tivits I've noticed lately, myself included, switching over to Containment Priest in the 99 of the deck, and I think that's a pretty solid switch. It's the card's pretty good. We have another Krark Silas. I believe this is the same one that won the other day, or the other week, I guess at this point. Heads, you win. Tails, I lose by base spread. This is another Krark Silas. Yeah, and I'm seeing Vindictive Flamestoker again, so I'm assuming this is the same pilot, although Vilis in the deck is pretty spicy. Definitely not one that I expected. And I guess they are not on ad nauseum either. So this deck definitely trying to just leverage the fact that you get things like a double protected Demonic Consultation or Tainted Pact with your Thassa's Oracle. You can do the classic Krark stuff by getting your Harmonic Prodigies, your Archmage Emeritus, your Tavern Scoundrel onto the battlefield. You don't have a clone for your Krark, right? But getting access to black gets you a lot of really good tutors. It gets you a lot of really good spells. You get to, have a bunch of mana generating spells and stuff like that. You get to have payoffs with cards like Vilis, as we're seeing up in the top here. Entomb Reanimate stuff is definitely an interesting way to take the deck because, it's really awkward when you have a Krark and you try to jam an ad nauseum and then you flip a Tails and then you put the ad nause back in your hand and you just tap 5 mana for nothing, right? So this deck definitely trying to leverage all of like the classic Krark synergies here and have some cards that it doubles up. If you just double a Demonic Tutor, turns out your deck's doing pretty decently for itself. And then using this Grixis Krark and Grixis being some of the strongest colors in the format to then leverage some wins using Underworld Breach or Thoracle win lines. We have Weaving with Kiki Hulk by the Dawn Shan. This is another Timna, Tana, Protean Hulk, Kiki Jiki style deck. So, this archetype is one that I feel like people associate, or I guess this commander combination people have been associating with Blood Pod for a really long time, but I feel like the most consistent results is people like Lisby or our pilot here today and a couple other folks is a lot of these Timna Tana using Vivian on the hunt to go up your lines by going Felidar Guardian when you sacrifice your Timna into your Karmic Guide, into your Kiki, into getting the Karmic Guide back, the Felidar Guardian, etc., win the game with Infinite Kiki Felidar. That classic stuff to either go up the Vivian line or use Protean Hulk to be able to do the exact same line by, Protean Hulk, get the Karmic Guide, do the same thing, get the Kiki, blah, 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 etc. Yeah, and so these lines are how you just get the game. Like, they're pretty concentric. They layer on top of one another. This one's also playing the Leonin Relic Warder line, so being able to have an Animate Dead style effect and Leonin Relic Warder allows you to have an infinite death copy thing going on, and then with a sack outlaw like Goblin Bombardment, you can just kill your opponents that way. No, it doesn't seem like there's any like Blood Artist style effects that you normally see associated with this backup line, so it looks like that's definitely more of an afterthought backup line, and only really goes off with Goblin Bombardment. With Viscerous here, you can like scry your whole library, which is kind of interesting, but definitely not the most focused on the Leonin lines here. But yeah, deck's pretty sweet. I'll love me some Kiki Jiki stuff, as evidenced by some certain aspects of my body. It's I love a Protean Hulk's deck. I love a Kiki Jiki deck. So really cool to see this deck starting to consistently perform over and over again. It's hard for decks that don't have blue to continually do well in the format, but the fact that it's these layered creature combos that are kind of hard to interact with, and a lot of really decent mid-range pieces here that can generate a ton of advantage, and the combination of all of the above is providing wins. So congrats. We have MP Pfefferman Max here with Florian. So Max is a player who you'll hear about a lot in a lot of the in-person tournaments playing this Florian deck, and Max has been playing this Florian deck for quite some time. Top 16 Oktoberfest and a couple other tournaments, but has not played any online tournaments until now, and I believe Max was saying this was his first online tournament. Just consistently doing well with this Florian deck. A player who is really fun to play with, really positive force in the community. I think someone who's just really positive to be around, and generally a really nice guy, and playing a really cool list that people don't usually take to the tournament scene. But Florian here being a really cool sort of mid-range Rakdos deck, using a lot of these pieces here to gain advantage. For those who don't know, it's a first strike 3/3 for 1 in Rakdos, and it says the beginning of your post-combat main phase, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the total amount of life your opponent's lost this turn. So all the damage all your opponents have lost pre-post-combat main phase. Then you can look at that many cards, exile one of them, and you may play that card until the end of the turn. So a lot of the time I noticed that Max will be digging like 6, 7, 8 cards deep when Florian hits the battlefield, because, you know, you're just chipping in here and there, and a 3/3 first strike definitely gets in for damage, right? So the ability for Florian to just sort of whack your opponents for a decent amount of damage, and then just dig really deep for the piece you need, like the Demonic Tutor, your Wishclaw Talisman, or your combo piece, your Underworld Breach, etc., etc. And then the deck tries to win with any of those options that we sort of talked about there a second ago. The deck does run Aetherflux Reservoir as a win condition outlet, using the Bolus's Sensei combo to be able to generate infinite damage and kill your opponents with Aetherflux Reservoir. It's also an Underworld Breach deck, and I believe it is on Praetor's Grasp, so if you have like a Breach grinding station loop thing going on, you can also Praetor's Grasp your opponent's stats as oracles too, if something happens to your Aetherflux Reservoir. We played in the top 16 of this tournament, and Max had an early Magus of the Moon, but I was lucky enough to have kept an opener that just naturally had Dockside Emil in the decks, or in the opening hand. So I literally just played a land and passed for a lot of this game, and it was just the case where I played Dockside, and Emil had exactly 7 mana after I played the Dockside, and just win infinite, and while my opponents were tapped out, and worked out pretty well for me. And I definitely was able to capitalize upon my opponents just sort of thinking I was locked out of the game in that semifinals. So it was kind of a wild match there for sure. But yeah, no, seriously, big ups to Max. Max is a really positive person to play with, and this deck is sweet, and it's a lot of really cool explosive Rakdos stuff, while also, like, you know, being able to be a little more mid-rangey, you know, take advantage of the benefits of these colors, and sort of, you know, play some smart pieces like, you know, Tibble's Trickery, Wild Magic Surge, stuff like that, to get around the weaknesses of the colors as well. So congrats to Max, great job. We have Safi Boon Hulk by Nilstan. This is another top 16 with this Safi list by Nilstan. I played with them in the Swiss of this tournament as well. Their deck was like a turn away from popping off when we played. And yeah, this deck's pretty cool. I mean, it's green-white Safi, which is just not a deck I feel like people talk about ever. And Nilstan has been, you know, piloting this deck to consistent success in their local meta, as far as I'm aware, and then just, you know, now starting to show up in these online events and just, you know, get these combos going. So there's a lot of crazy stuff you can do here, a lot of layered combos. Birthing Pod, like in many decks, becomes a 1-card win condition with your commander. A lot of different ways to just generate a bunch of card advantage, and then, you know, a ton of layered combos, as I mentioned before, like things like Revelark and Safi, and Sack Outlet being infinite, Sun Titan and Safi being infinite, Karmic Guide and Felidar loops, and, you know, using your Boon Weaver Giant to get a pattern rebirth on it, and then, you know, you have that creature combo going there. I love that you know, Boon Weaver Giant still seeing play in the year of our Lord 2023. But, you know, as I mentioned before, Renegade Rallier is another combo with this card. So, like, there's just, I feel like 1,000 cards that combo with Safi, and the fact that you can sort of do these combos through Rule of Laws. You can have your Archons and your Thalias out, and they don't really affect your combos much of anything at all. And then you get to fill the deck with a bunch of stacks pieces and mid-range pieces, and, you know, make green-white look like a really playable archetype, which is pretty cool, because it's traditionally not a color combo that is very favored. But congrats to Nilstan for doing well with this list, and putting up consistent results with it. It's really cool, and definitely always been a big fan of Safi, so it's really cool to see this deck see play. This is Ka0s with They Call It Blue Farm. I don't know what the difference is between it just being Blue Farm and saying they call it Blue Farm, but yeah, this is a, you know, classic Blue Farm list. Definitely playing some of the newer pieces, Fairy Mastermind being one of them. I literally was talking with some people in my local shop about how I thought that a displacer kit in Blue Farm list would actually be pretty solid, and you know, before I even got a chance to sleeve the deck up, here we have a displacer kit in Blue Farm list. So, you know, classic Blue Farm archetype, right? Trying to still, you know, do the Underworld Breach thing, do the Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation thing, trying to win with ad nauseum, but also be like a much more mid-range deck, right? You're trying to play the mid-range game in Blue Farm. and also just have the explosivity that a lot of other colors can't grant you the way that blue farm can. You have all of these really high card quality pieces here. You have your Grand Abolisher, your Ranger Captain, your Lavinia, stopping your opponents, your Oppos, your Drannith, your Dockside, all these high card quality pieces that are creatures that are also giving you Timna draws, and then you can also play a bunch of layered combos, like the Kitten stuff. Teferi is just like a silence for your deck a lot of the time. I've literally seen blue farm decks play Teferi without playing Kitten, which I think is a little silly because I would just commit to the Kitten, right? But like, it's totally viable to do that way too, and then you get to have your, you know, 4-color really good deck, right? You have your intuition piles you can grab, you have Fierce and Deflecting Squad because Timna is super easy to get down at a really reasonably early rate. And then you can just do some of the best stuff in the format. So, you know, a lot of people are used to seeing blue farm at this point. I'm very happy to see Kitten blue farm because that's been something I've been pushing for a little bit of time and something I enjoy from the archetype. It definitely, I guess, it'll spice it up until like 3 more people do it, and then I guess it's not spicy anymore. But congrats to Ka0s for putting up the result with this deck. Nice job. We have I Am Bad for Not Playing Dockside, another back-to-back performance, top 16, with this deck by Peon Face. This is an Atraxa list. I played against this list in the Swiss of this tournament, and it's actually my only loss for the day. That loss was a rough game. I'm not going to get into details on it, but it was a rough game. I did get to do the very cool thing of copying Atraxa with my own Sakashima, the Imposter, which is pretty cool because I got, I think, 8 cards off of, or 7 cards, or 8 cards off of my version of Atraxa. But then this player also copied my Sakashima, which meant that they had 2 Atraxas on the battlefield, which was love. And then we lost to the Food Chain combo. But Atraxa, for those who don't know, it's the new Sans Red deck of the format. You know, being able to play things like the Teferi Kitten combo, like we were just talking about. As I mentioned, it does play Food Chain because you can infinitely cast your commander for the Food Chain combo, and then you're kind of trying to diversify your the amount of permanent types in your deck so that when you play an Atraxa, you can pull some of the best cards from your deck. You play cards like Displacer Kitten, so you can recast or have flicker your Atraxa, basically, and you know, get more and more cards. You know, the first Atraxa doesn't always win the game, but the second Atraxa usually does, is what I found. It's also playing, you know, Thoracle, Demonic Consultation lines, stuff like that. Any clone effects are always very good with your commander because, you know, recasting Atraxa for 9 is very expensive, but recasting Atraxa for 2 mana turns out it's actually pretty good. And yeah, the deck is just trying to basically resolve an Atraxa, generate advantage, usually resolve a second Atraxa. That's from the play patterns I've noticed with these Atraxa lists. And by the time the second Atraxa comes down, you've usually won the game. Or, you know, sometimes you can also get the early, you know, Tainted Pact for my Food Chain piece, go off the Food Chain kind of thing, which is also a super viable way to win the game. And then it's just a lot of, like, classic 4-color mid-range stuff in the format. You know, you're trying to generate a bunch of value, play a bunch of engines, try and play a lot of mana on the early turns, and get your Atraxa down as soon as possible so that you can start generating a ton of advantage. Let's go to now our top 4. We have Grind Them Into Dust by Wounded Satellite on our top 4 players here. It was actually really cool. After the top 4 match, we actually talked about Kinnan for like a solid 45 minutes after this tournament because Wounded Satellite knew that I, you know, had a couple results with Kinnan and that I was a big fan of the deck. So we actually talked a good amount about Kinnan after the tournament was done, which was pretty fun. But we have Kinnan here. This is sort of it is a big flip Kinnan list, but has some like different pieces than other lists I've noticed. This list is not on the Trinisphere stacks package that I know a couple of the lists are on. I also noticed that this list is doing the Elvish Spirit Guide tech, which I talked to Satellite about after this tournament, and I mentioned that I wasn't a huge fan of it, but he was, you know, proposing that this card was actually pretty good. Armored Scrapgorger is one that I know that Satellite is one of the only people I've heard about talking about this card, and said that this is actually one of the secret MVPs of their list because the amount of things it can like snipe out of graveyards, and especially with Hoarding Broodlord being a card in the format now, and obviously Underworld Breach still being a great combo. You know, it's actually got a lot of utility, which I was a little surprised about. This list is also on the Perplexing Chimera shenanigans, trying to do the crop rotation stuff to, you know, go grab your homeward path so you can control Perplexing Chimera. We talked a lot about Perplexing Chimera after the match, and it did not come up in our top 4, but it's definitely a strong card here. And I feel bad, like this deck really didn't go off during our top 4 match, but it was a grindy game, so it was definitely interesting to see. And yeah, yeah, so it's a classic, you know, as I mentioned, more big flip Kinnan focused list, similar in many aspects to Tyler from Play to Win's list, but also with enough innovations and things on its own that it's reasonably different. Also, the fewest amount of lands I've ever seen in a big flip Kinnan list, for sure. Mine's down to 27, which is, they're already few, but like, yeah, definitely not a ton of lands in this deck, but a lot of ways to get a lot of mana, get Kinnan out, do the Kinnan thing. Kinnan's a deck I have a lot of fondness for, as many of you know, and it's a deck I expect to consistently do well for until the card gets banned for some reason, or something in it gets banned, because I think it's just a solid deck. The fact that you have a 2-mana commander that comes down, usually turn 2, have your Fierce Guardianships online, your Mox Ambers, all of your things now are tapping for like 6-7 mana, doing ridiculous stuff. Yeah, a lot of fondness for Kinnan. Deck's really good, and I love that there are so many different like individual pieces that people can play, for sure. Here we have Jeska, the nuclear option, which is a great name, by Lurbo. This is a Timna Jeska list. This is a reanimating classic Timna Jeska list, but this one is unlike the list from our last Mox Masters. This is one's back on Ad Nauseam. So this is definitely an artifact heavy list. It's actually on Citadel and Ad Nauseam. Cloudstone Curio combos with the commander, obviously being able to Dockside combo and then, you know, filter all of that into Jeska to kill your opponents infinitely. Apart from that, it's doing the classic Timna, you know, get your early drops down, have a really low Ad Nauseam curve, and then also sometimes be able to just go, I'm gonna, you know, animate Dead My World Gorger Dragon, make infinite mana. You can reanimate Villas. It's really curious because I think it's a 23 lander, which is, I think Timna Jeska is starting to like rival Rogsai with the amount of lands being played. I've seen a couple of these like 23 land Timna Jeska lists, which is crazy to me. And with only 23 lands and an 8-drop and a 6-drop, no, 2 6-drops in the deck while playing Ad Nauseam, the curve is still 1.29. So this is a lean deck. They're still on 4-drop Smothering Tide, 3-drop Necropotent, 6-drop, 3-drop, 5-drop, you know, like 3-drop, 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 8-drop, 6-drop, 3-drop, 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 and somehow the curve is still 1.3 with this deck. So this is a lean deck despite a bunch of fatties, and it's really cool to see this Timna Jeska deck go kind of pop off. Once again, down to 23 lands, which is crazy for this archetype, but you know, it's doing the thing. It's doing the thing pretty consistently. A lot of really interactive, interesting pieces here. And, you know, Timna just gets you a lot of card advantage. And Jeska is a fantastic outlet in the command zone. This list also issuing the Auriok Salvager combo, which I know some Timna Jeska lists are on. This one's on LED, just no Auriok Salvagers. And yeah, so congrats to our friend Larvo here for doing well in this top 4. Second place in this tournament is me here. So yeah, as I mentioned, I got into the top 4 of this tournament. I presented a couple wins in the finals and got very close to taking it down, but did not get there in this top 4. But yeah, I got second place here in this tournament and was very happy with my performance, only losing to once during the Swiss and then once in the finals to our top player, who we'll talk about here in a minute. But playing a list that many people do not know me for. I was playing 5-color Sisay, and this was, apart from sleeving up this list for MagicCon Minneapolis, in which I played 3 or 4 games with it. I had never played this deck before, but I had borrowed Mike from the Howling Salt Mine. I had borrowed his Sisay list, and this was after Tyvar had been printed. And I played his list for a couple games, and I was like, oh, like, I really think you need to put the Planeswalker package back in. Like, I think you need the Nicol Bolas, the Teferi packages back in the deck, which he wasn't playing at the time. And it was one of those things where I was like, hey, if you had that package, I would have won this game 4 or 5 times now. But anyway, so I was playing that combo, and I was playing this deck, and I was like, oh, this deck I feel like got a lot better lately with the printing of Tyvar and a couple of other small pieces. So then I took that deck, and I also took Malcolm from the Ramp Gangs top 4 deck. You know, in my original list, I'd say inspired by many pilots and also Malcolm of the Ramp Gang specifically, just because Malcolm top 4 Punt City 2 with a Sisay list that's probably about 20 cards different than what I'm working with here, but you know, has a lot of the same ideas. And so I think mine is close to the most Planeswalkers I've seen in Sisay lists. Also, Planeswalker is my favorite card type, and the fact that I get to play them in cEDH makes me over the moon happy. This deck's been really fun to play, though. It just sort of does its thing in a way that you don't, like, a lot of people get caught off guard by it. So the main win condition, and the one that I go for the most, is being able to tap Sisay enough times and get enough mana dorks so that you can activate it infinite times. And so usually what that looks like is you get a card. Let's go over the playtester here so I can make this a little bit easier. So you get a card like Bloom Tender out, and then let's say you have your commander Sisay, and you have a card like, let's just go with, you have a card like Kinnan. So you have a card like Kinnan, which allows you to get anything with Sisay that has a mana value of 3 or less when you activate Sisay's ability, right? So then when Kinnan's out, this is now tapping for 3 mana, right? So say with Sisay, then you go grab like something like a Tyvar. Okay, so now your Bloom Tender is actually tapping for 4 mana. And Tyvar can untap it. And you're like, okay, cool. So now it's doing the thing again. If you have 1 red mana, then you can go through your library and you can go grab something like a Saheeli Rai. And you go, okay, I'm going to minus this and I'm going to make a hasty copy of Bloom Tender. And then suddenly that's tapping for all 5 mana. And so you go through little chains like this so that you get it so that whatever is tapping for mana. So if you have Dockside, that makes this a little easier, right? Because then you just get a bunch of things that like just flicker the Dockside over and over again. But the whole point is you get it so that every card you're pulling out is basically creating a scenario in which you can then activate Sisay again. And the end state you want to get to is to get out Aminatou the Fate Shifter, Nicol Bolas, Dragon God, and Oath of Teferi. So when you have all 3 of these, what happens is Aminatou, well, first of all, Oath of Teferi lets your planeswalkers activate twice, which is very important to this. Aminatou says you can exile, it's in -1, you can exile another permanent you own, then return to the battlefield under your control. Nicol Bolas has all loyalty abilities of all other planeswalkers on the battlefield, which means it has Aminatou's ability. So with just these 2, without Oath of Teferi, you can flicker them infinitely, right? With Oath of Teferi on the battlefield, what happens is you can then activate them twice, but every time you minus them, one of those activations is just to minus and reset, right? So then they're reset and they are able to then activate an additional time. So for example, you can do stuff like activate once to flicker the Nicol Bolas and then activate once to untap a permanent that you need to untap. Once again, like with something with Bloom Tender, right? Tyvar gives a haste, right? So you can then that. And so now every time you're going through the loop, you're generating infinite mana. Or you can use Nicol Bolas' +1, which is you draw a card and every opponent exiles a permanent they control or a card from their hand, right? So then you start like exiling all the permanents, stripping all of them, and then you find a card that you want to basically like, you have infinite mana, flicker something infinitely. You can do stuff like get a meal on the battlefield and like flicker Kroxa infinitely, things like that. Or you can just get a Finale of Devastation out of your deck because Nicol Bolas allows you to draw your whole deck and kill everybody. Or because you have Saheeli Rai as well, what you can do is Saheeli has an uptick that says it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So now you can be flickering your Saheeli, or your Nicol Bolas actually gains the ability of Saheeli to be able to tick up. And now without casting any spells, by just activating your commander, you are able to assemble a chain that is able to kill everyone infinitely. And that is like the main way that you can win the deck, or win with the deck, sorry. You can also get Dockside combos, so you have Dockside plus Emil to be able to pop off with this deck and be able to go infinitely with those. You can also do Emil plus Derevi plus Gaia's Cradle, which is another combo that you can assemble completely by activating Sisay and tutoring. I noticed some people on the internet, when they saw that I was playing this list, had mentioned that they were off of the Aminatou Nicol Bolas combos, and to me that would ring as a mistake because it was just so easy to assemble this combo, and I just felt like the games in which I was able to get anything that tapped for 5 mana or a Dockside, I just won those games without really much hesitation, because it's really hard to interact with if you don't either remove, like have creature removal basically, or have some sort of way for, because like when you get the Sisay thing going, like you can win through a rule of law, you can win through artifact stacks, you can win through most things. And so that sort of power, the ability to like win through a lot of things that you would think traditionally would stop a combo deck popping off, were really, really instrumental. And it was so consistent to just have your commander to be able to do these things, right? So with such a clean chain, the object of your opponent is like, okay, but then how do I actually stop the deck doing the thing, right? When you play cards like Drannith Magistrate, stuff like that. But that's why the deck is just packed full of removal. Dismember was an MVP for me as I've been playing this deck. It's been really, really solid. I don't play ad nauseum. I don't care about my life total. So Dismember's been great. And, you know, the main thing stopping us, as I mentioned, is like Drannith or like a Linvala. And Dismember hits all the stuff that's a giant pain in our butt. Sisay also being super easy to cast, makes Guardianship and Deflecting Swat online. You know, a lot of the same mentality we were talking about with Najila. And instead of, you know, doing the Najila thing where you have a couple random 1-card combos, that you have to cast. What Sisay, the benefit of Sisay is that you sort of can use your commander as card advantage and mana advantage to just pull your really important pieces. It's tutors and card advantage and toolbox to pull your really powerful stuff out of your deck, put it on the battlefield right away. And then, you know, you do play some cards that are, many people would consider lower card quality, but each of them has utility. And that's the really interesting part of this deck. Now, a lot of Sisay pilots or people who are playing against it will misread the fact that, you know, you do need to have mana value or like mana colors that allow Sisay to be bumped in legendary permanents. So like I was playing against a player who, you know, didn't realize that I was like, okay, yeah, I can untap and activate Sisay next turn, but I can only get a 1-drop or a 0-drop with it. You know what I mean? So that's definitely something to think about when you're playing this deck or playing against the deck, is that you really have to think about your lines. I love this deck because this deck is like, I love to figure out a complicated puzzle. And that's what this deck is. It is 100%, if you like a complicated puzzle, you're going to adore playing this deck. If that's not your bag, if that's not your jam, you don't want to like spend a lot of time going like, oh, if I tap my mana wrong, I won't be able to assemble this. But if I tap my mana correctly, I can win the game right now in a position where it doesn't look like I can win the game. That, to me, that's my perfect kind of deck. I love decks like that. And that's why I really have enjoyed playing this list. And, you know, even gold fishing this deck is super fun because I'm like, okay, I untap with my mana dork, and can I actually win the game this turn from almost nothing? And that's like the fun part of this deck. And you also just get to play like a bunch of really cool legendary creatures. Some pieces that I know are not traditionally played. People ask about Kroxa a good amount, and basically Kroxa is probably getting cut just because there are better ways to do this with a higher card quality, it seems. But basically, you play your Kroxa, and then with Emil, you're able to flicker Kroxa before it sacrifices itself. You hold priority if you have infinite mana, basically. And so Kroxa is a way for Sisay to turn infinite mana with Emil and Kroxa into infinite damage, because your opponents discard the cards in their hand, and then if they can't discard anymore, they take 3 damage. I'm being told that by some other Sisay pilots that there are just better ways than Kroxa to be able to get that. And also, like, Kroxa not staying on the battlefield to give Sisay more colors does kind of suck a bit. It's in black-red, which are like the tough colors for Sisay, which is cool, like that it is a black-red option, but it's not a black-red option that actually stays, which is kind of a problem, right? So unfortunately, as much as I really like Kroxa in the deck, it's probably gonna get the axe soon. One card that I think I play in this list, and I haven't seen in any other Sisay list, is Rocco. Now, obviously, if you tutor Rocco with Sisay, it doesn't literally do anything. But it's in the deck because it's a legendary creature, and for me, what this card reads is 5 mana, tutor Dockside, and give Sisay 3 pips for tutoring. And so that's sort of why it's played in this list, is that I have it as a 5 mana, assemble a Dockside, and give your Sisay 3 more colors so that you can grab larger creatures. And usually, depending on the Dockside, if you're going for this line, you're winning the game that turn if you can assemble those 2. MVPs of the deck, by far, Teferi, Time Raveler, being able to either on your main phase or on your end step or your opponent's end step before your turn, get a Teferi out right before you untap, have a protected turn, bounce an important stacks piece that's stopping you, you win the game. That card's insane. Tyvar, brand new addition to this deck. Card's super crazy, gives all your mana dorks haste. In a deck like this, your cards like Savala and your Fabra Elders and your Bloom Tenders are super important, so them having haste is huge. So that card's pretty cool in this list. Adrenaline Vala, obviously new tech. This card won me several games at MC Minneapolis, just being able to like, oh man, I'm locked out because my opponents have a bunch of different creatures that like stop my combos going off, but I can tutor up Adrenaline Vala or just cast it from my hand, and then suddenly all of those pieces like Spellskite and stuff like that were like messing with me, being able to go off, don't do that. I was able to do a game in Minneapolis where I like played Adrenaline Vala, shut off all my opponent's mana dorks, stopped the Spellskite that stopped me from comboing, and then sacrificed it to Ranger Captain, which was another person's Ranger Captain, turned Adrenaline Vala into that ability, sacrificed it, and went off from there. Sakushima, just a tutorable clone you can get with your commander. It's got enough flexible utility, but yeah, it's really solid. And then the rest of the deck is, as mentioned, a lot of interaction, trying to make sure you're able to execute your own game plan. And the only other thing of note is that I'm on 30 lands in this deck, with the intention specifically that Otawara I consider a spell. The idea is that Otawara is my uncounterable bounce spell, especially in a deck that is literally full of legendary creatures, right? I love that Odawara costs less and is able to be, as I mentioned, nearly uncounterable bounce spell. And you get to play 30 lands, which is good because your deck is 5 colors, so it's a little mana hungry. And yeah, but like I had a ton of fun playing this deck. It is a deck that is officially part of my roster, like no hesitation for me. I really, really liked playing this deck. As I mentioned, if you like solving puzzles, you're going to love this deck because that's what this deck is. It is 100%, okay, while everyone else is taking their turns, I'm going to think about how I can untap and just win the game. And some of the times you can't do it. Some of the times you have to tutor for your Drana and Lenvalas. Sometimes you have to tutor for your Tyvars to untap an important piece to be able to tap for an opposition agent, stuff like that, and play the mid-range game. But you get to play 5 colors, you get to play a lot of really good interaction, and you don't play the traditional win cons in 5 colors, but instead what you get to play is a lot of really, really cool cards that do not get seen a lot in cEDH, and you get to play things like Oko and crazy stuff like that, and be able to pop off with a lot of wacky legendary creatures, and play a deck that, you know, I just had a blast playing this. It was really, really fun, and I definitely will be playing this in more tournaments in the future. I really enjoy the play patterns of this deck. Also, Sylvala might be one of the best cards in the deck. Card's just super silly, and you know, just being able to get a mana dork that taps for a lot of mana with your commander's ability is crazy. And we have our first place player here. Another first place by Tivit. We have Jamaican Dude, who is a player who you should recognize at this point, has been around since even before I was playing cEDH. And just someone consistently putting up decent results. And, you know, we don't hear from Jamaican Dude every tournament, but whenever they play, they usually do pretty well. We have a classic Tivit list here. As far as I'm aware, this one's a little more aggressive, you know, going for pieces like Ad Nauseam in their Tivit list. From what I was told, Jamaican is specifically not playing Displacer Kitten because Jamaican could not find a Displacer Kitten before the tournament. So for anyone wondering why, like, Teferi's in here and no Displacer Kitten, it is not from a lack of desire wanting Displacer Kitten. It is specifically did not own a Displacer Kitten for this tournament. You know, some pieces that not every list are playing, pieces like Drown in the Lock. Tivit's a really mid-rangey control deck, you know, doing that thing. Limduil's Vault, you know, some people love this card, some people hate this card. It's in between. Love seeing Stubborn Denial. You know, you got that 6-mana commander, might as well use it. This list definitely, I know I cut Fierce Guardianship for those games where you just don't have Tivit, but this one's on Stubbs and Fierce Guardianship just saying like, nah, I bet I'll get my Tivit out, and I'll play around that play pattern, which is pretty interesting and pretty cool. You know, playing cards like Pongify, which you don't usually see in a 3-color deck like this. Hydroblast, you know, a lot of people have been talking about this card more. Hits Dockside, hits Winota, hits Underworld Breach, a lot of really scary cards in the format, a lot of the defining cards in the format. Honestly, it was the tournament I played at my local store. Half of the games I played that weekend were decided by a Dockside resolution, if not even more than half of those games. So, you know, I hate to say it, but cards like Blue Blast and Hydroblast aren't looking as bad as they once did, just because of the fact that there's a lot of pieces that it sort of, you know, get hit by that are very relevant towards the format. You know, this deck's not playing too many insane Tivit pieces, but, you know, a lot of the really good mid-range stuff. I believe Jamaican Dude had made a comment that Z-Rob was the person who gave them their list. So congrats to Jamaican for winning the entire tournament with this deck. It's a pretty sweet list, and definitely a solid win from Jamaican for this tournament. So congratulations. Thank you for watching this top 16 breakdown of Ka0s Treasure Series 3. If you like videos like this, make sure to hit like and subscribe. What was the most interesting deck to you from this tournament? We've now had, you know, 3, as I mentioned, decks in this tournament from March of the Machine Aftermath. We also, you know, have a lot of decks that aren't traditionally played. We have a Krark Silas, we have Dina, we have a lot of Florian and Safi and a bunch of really cool stuff like that, as well as, you know, my Sisay list that I'm really happy about, and I'm super happy to take it down into the top 4. What was the most surprising thing you saw in today's episode? Make sure to leave that down in the comment below. Some decks you were surprised by, anything that interested you. I'd love to hear about those in the comments below. Let me know what's up with these decks. It's really cool stuff, and very exciting to see the C play, and I'm really happy to, you know, bounce back after Punt City 2, where I had a pretty rough run with Winota, to be able to jump back into a not only one top 4 this weekend, but be able to then go to a local event and top 4 that as well. So super happy with the Sisay deck. I definitely really enjoy that list and will be playing it for the near future. And I'd love to hear about people's opinions on that. Also, a reminder that we are affiliated with Dragonshield sleeves. Dragonshield sleeves are pretty rad. You get some pretty cool stuff here, like this Pandragon sleeve, which is one of the cutest magic cards I've ever seen in my entire life. Or we have these other cool sleeves here, like these the Water Rabbit 2023 ones. I mean, the art on these is actually gorgeous. And Dragonshield sleeves were already the sleeves I used for literally all of my cEDH cards. And then Dragonshield said, "Hey, do you want to be an affiliate?" And I said, "Absolutely. I can never recommend a product more." So if you're interested in that, there is an affiliate link down in the description below, along with all the top 16 decks from today's tournament and information on how to contact Monarch Media, who is an ambassadorship. I'm an ambassador for Monarch Media. They have a lot of cool events coming up in the second half of this year. And as much as I would love to share details at the current moment, I cannot do so, but make sure to check out their socials, which are always in the link down below, because they have been very good to work with, and I'm really excited because they were the group that started basically cEDH tournaments as a real thing, if you don't count like DDM before COVID. And it's really, really cool to have tournament groups in the format who really care about making good tournament groups. So let me know about some interesting decks that you saw from today, any thoughts that you have on these lists, and I'll make sure to catch you all next time in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Catch you later. Peace.
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gonna feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted and you know I'm leaving. I'ma take what's mine with the webs I'm weaving. I could take this crowd from seeing to believing.